In just 47 seconds, America's sweetheart Jennifer Aniston would transform from gracious guest to absolutely livid, her voice rising to levels that had studio executives scrambling behind the scenes. What started as seemingly innocent banter about her personal life quickly spiraled into a verbal battleground that left cameras rolling and audiences gasping. The woman who had charmed millions as Rachel Green was about to show a side of herself that would make headlines for all the wrong reasons, and it was all because Jimmy Kimmel refused to know when to stop pushing. The tension was palpable from the moment Aniston walked onto the stage. Her usual bright smile seemed forced, and those who knew her well could detect the subtle tightness around her eyes. She had agreed to appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live to promote her latest project, but whispers backstage suggested she was already on edge about certain topics that had been circulating in the tabloids for weeks. The divorce rumors, the speculation about her relationships, the constant scrutiny of her personal choices, it was all weighing heavily on her shoulders as she settled into the guest chair. Kimmel, known for his sharp wit and sometimes boundary-pushing humor, seemed oblivious to the warning signs. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. As the cameras rolled and the studio audience applauded, he launched into his opening pleasantries with his characteristic smirk, the one that had made him famous but also earned him a reputation for being willing to go too far for a laugh. "Jennifer, you look fantastic as always," Kimmel began, his tone carrying that familiar hint of mischief that regular viewers had come to expect. "I have to say, for someone who's supposedly going through all this drama the tabloids keep talking about, you're handling it remarkably well." Aniston's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Her media-trained smile remained in place, but her fingers gripped the armrest of her chair just a little tighter. "Jimmy, you know how it is with tabloids. They love to create stories where there aren't any." "Oh, come on," Kimmel pressed, leaning forward with that predatory gleam in his eyes that suggested he smelled blood in the water. "Surely, some of it has to be true. I mean, the photos of you leaving that lawyer's office last week were pretty convincing." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. Even they could sense that something was different about this exchange. Aniston's jaw clenched momentarily before she forced another smile. "Jimmy, I'm here to talk about my new film, not to feed the gossip machine." But Kimmel wasn't backing down. If anything, her obvious discomfort seemed to encourage him. "But that's what makes good television, right? Real talk, real emotions. Our audience wants to know the real Jennifer Aniston, not just the polished Hollywood version." "The real Jennifer Aniston," she repeated slowly, her voice taking on a dangerous edge that anyone with half a brain would have recognized as a warning. "And what exactly do you think that means, Jimmy?" The host chuckled, clearly misreading the situation entirely. "Well, for starters, someone who's honest about what's really going on in her life. I mean, we've all been there. Relationships end. People move on. There's no shame in admitting when things aren't working out." Aniston's eyes flashed, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. "You want honesty? Here's some honesty for you. I came on this show as a professional courtesy, to promote my work and have a pleasant conversation with someone I thought was a friend. But apparently, you're more interested in being a bottom feeder than a host." The studio fell dead silent. Even Kimmel seemed taken aback by the venom in her voice, but his ego wouldn't let him back down now, not in front of millions of viewers. "Hey, I'm just asking the questions everyone wants answered. That's my job." "Your job," Aniston said, her voice rising with each word, "is supposed to be entertaining people, not exploiting their personal pain for cheap laughs and ratings." The camera operators exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away. The producer in the control room was frantically gesturing, but no one was quite sure what he wanted them to do. This was uncharted territory, even for late-night television. Kimmel, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far but unable to swallow his pride, doubled down with a nervous laugh. "Come on, Jennifer, don't be so dramatic. It's just a conversation." The word dramatic hit Aniston like a slap in the face. Her entire body went rigid, and when she spoke again, her voice was deadly quiet. "Dramatic? You think this is dramatic, Jimmy? You haven't seen anything yet." The tension in the studio was now suffocating. Audience members were looking around at each other, wondering if they should be witnessing this, if the cameras would stop rolling, if security would intervene. But the train wreck was too compelling to look away from, and everyone, from the cameraman to the guy operating the boom mic, seemed frozen in place. Kimmel, still not grasping the severity of what he had unleashed, made what would prove to be a fatal mistake. Look, I get that you're upset, but maybe if you were more open about your life, people wouldn't have to speculate so much. Just saying. That was it. That was the moment Jennifer Aniston's legendary patience finally snapped completely. And what happened next would be talked about for years to come. Aniston shot up from her chair so fast it actually rolled backwards several feet, the sudden movement causing a collective gasp from the studio audience. Her eyes were blazing with a fury that no one in that room had ever seen from America's sweetheart. And when she spoke, her voice cut through the stunned silence like a knife through silk. Are you fucking kidding me right now? The profanity hit the room like a thunderclap, and several audience members actually recoiled in their seats. You want me to be more open? You want me to feed the vultures so they'll leave me alone? That's your brilliant solution? Kimmel's face went pale, but his ego was still driving the bus. Jennifer, there's no need to... No need to what? Get upset? Defend myself? Stand up to some asshole who thinks my personal life is his entertainment? Her voice was getting louder with each word, and the raw emotion behind it was making everyone in the studio deeply uncomfortable. You sit here every night making jokes about people's pain, their failures, their most vulnerable moments, and you call it comedy. The host tried to regain control, his media training kicking in even as sweat began beading on his forehead. Look, I think we're getting a little carried away here. Why don't we take a quick break and... Carried away? Aniston laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. It was a harsh, bitter sound that made the hair on everyone's arms stand up. You mean like how you got carried away when you spent 10 minutes last month making fun of my supposed biological clock and my desperate search for love? Or how about when you did that whole bit about my failed relationships and had actors come out dressed as my ex-boyfriends? The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of this career-defining meltdown, and the control room was in absolute chaos. The producer was screaming at someone to cut to commercial, but the director was arguing back that this was television gold and they couldn't stop now. Kimmel's facade was cracking, and his true colors were starting to show. That was comedy, Jennifer. It's what we do here. If you can't handle a little ribbing, maybe you shouldn't be in Hollywood. Those words hung in the air for a moment, and then Aniston's face transformed into something genuinely terrifying. A little ribbing? A little ribbing? Her voice reached a decibel level that had the sound engineers frantically adjusting their equipment. You've made my personal life your personal punchline for years, and you call it a little ribbing? She began pacing back and forth in front of his desk, her hands gesticulating wildly as months, maybe years of pent-up frustration came pouring out. You want to know what's really dramatic, Jimmy? What's dramatic is watching a grown man build his entire career on tearing down women who've done nothing to him, except be successful and visible. Now wait, just a minute. Kimmel started to interject, but Aniston whirled around to face him with such intensity that he actually flinched backward in his chair. No, you wait a minute. I'm talking now. And you're gonna listen for once, instead of just waiting for your turn to make another shitty joke. The crowd was dead silent, hanging on every word of this unprecedented display. You think because you're behind that desk, because you have writers and producers and a network backing you up, that gives you the right to treat people like they're your personal entertainment? Kimmel's jaw tightened, and his own anger was starting to surface. I treat everyone the same way, Jennifer. It's called equal opportunity comedy. Equal opportunity? Aniston's voice cracked with incredulous rage. When's the last time you spent segment after segment analyzing George Clooney's dating life and questioning whether he'd ever be truly happy? When have you ever brought Leonardo DiCaprio on here and grilled him about his desperate need for validation through relationships? The silence that followed was deafening. Even Kimmel seemed to realize he was trapped in a corner of his own making, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Those guys don't make their personal lives such public fodder. Public fodder? Aniston's voice reached a pitch that had people in the back row covering their ears. I've never sold a story about my relationships. I've never called paparazzi on myself. I've never done anything except try to live my life and do my job, and somehow that makes me public fodder for mediocre comedians who can't come up with actual material. The insult hit its mark, and Kimmel's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. Mediocre? You want to talk about mediocre? How about making the same romantic comedy 15 times and calling it a career? The studio audience audibly gasped at the low blow, and several people actually stood up, unsure whether they should intervene or flee. Aniston went absolutely still for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was deadly quiet and more terrifying than when she'd been screaming. There it is. The real Jimmy Kimmel, everybody. Not the lovable late-night host, not the guy who pretends to care about his guests. Just another bitter Hollywood bottom feeder who gets off on tearing down successful women because it makes him feel bigger. She stepped closer to his desk, her eyes never leaving his face. You know what's really pathetic, Jimmy? You've had every opportunity to be better, to be different, to actually use this platform for something meaningful. Instead, you chose to be a bully with a microphone. Kimmel was visibly struggling now, his carefully constructed television persona completely shattered. You don't know what you're talking about. I've raised millions for charity. Congratulations, you've discovered the bare minimum of human decency. Aniston cut him off savagely. That doesn't give you a free pass to be a piece of shit to women for entertainment value. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point, and everyone could sense that something even bigger was about to happen. Kimmel, his face now beet red with humiliation and rage, made the mistake that would end his career as he knew it. Standing up from behind his desk, he pointed an accusatory finger at Aniston and unleashed the venom he'd been holding back. You know what your problem is, Jennifer? You can't handle the fact that you're not America's sweetheart anymore. You're a middle-aged actress desperately clinging to relevance, and you can't stand that people see right through your perfect little image. The words hung in the air like poison, and for a moment, the entire studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then Aniston's face changed completely. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something far more dangerous, complete and utter contempt. Middle-aged? She repeated, her voice dripping with deadly calm. Desperately clinging to relevance? She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that made everyone's skin crawl. Jimmy, I've been in this business since before you knew what a television camera looked like. I've built a career that spans decades, earned the respect of my peers, and amassed more success than you could ever dream of. And you think calling me middle-aged is going to hurt my feelings? She stepped even closer to his desk, her voice rising again but controlled now, purposeful. Here's what's really happening here, you pathetic little man. You're a second-rate talk show host who peaked 10 years ago, and your ratings have been steadily declining because people are getting tired of your tired, misogynistic bullshit. So you thought you'd take a shot at me, thinking I'd just sit here and take it like all the other women who've been on this show. Kimmel tried to interrupt, but Aniston was on a roll now, and there was no stopping her. But here's the thing you didn't count on. I don't need you, Jimmy. I don't need this show, I don't need your approval, and I sure as hell don't need to sit here and be disrespected by some washed-up comedian who thinks being mean to women makes him edgy. The audience was completely transfixed, watching what was essentially a public execution being broadcast live on national television. Some people had their phones out, recording every second, knowing they were witnessing television history. You want to know what desperate looks like? Aniston continued, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had completely taken control of the situation. Desperate is a 5-6-year-old man whose biggest claim to fame is making fun of people braver and more talented than he'll ever be. Desperate is hiding behind writers and producers because you can't come up with an original thought on your own. Desperate is what you're going to look like when the network sees how you just treated one of the biggest stars in Hollywood on live television. Kimmel's face was now completely drained of color. He seemed to realize for the first time that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment, but it was far too late to take any of it back. Jennifer, Look, maybe we both got a little heated here. Oh, now you want to walk it back? Aniston's voice was filled with mock sympathy. Now that you realize you just committed professional suicide on live television, you want to pretend this was all just a misunderstanding? She shook her head in disgust. You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy. You had a platform. You had influence. You had the opportunity to lift people up, to use comedy to bring joy instead of pain, to be better than the bullies who came before you. And you chose to be this instead. She gestured around the studio with contempt. You chose to be a small, Petty man who gets his kicks from tearing down successful women because it makes you feel powerful for 30 seconds. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. But you're not powerful, Jimmy. You're pathetic. And after tonight, everyone's going to know it. The host made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. The show's not over, Jennifer. Why don't we just sit down and... The show is over. Aniston cut him off with finality. At least it is for me. She turned to face the audience directly, ignoring Kimmel completely. I want to apologize to all of you for what you just witnessed. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead you got a front row seat to a masterclass in everything that's wrong with this industry. Several audience members actually applauded, which seemed to surprise even Aniston. She managed a small, genuine smile for the first time all evening. But you know what? Maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Maybe it's time we stop pretending that this kind of behavior is acceptable just because it's wrapped up in comedy. She turned back to Kimmel, who was now slumped in his chair looking like a defeated man. I hope you learned something tonight, Jimmy. I really do. Because this is what happens when you push the wrong woman too far. Without another word, she walked over to where she had been sitting and picked up her purse. The entire studio watched in complete silence as America's sweetheart prepared to make her exit, but she wasn't done yet. Stopping at the edge of the stage, she turned back one final time. Oh, and Jimmy? When your ratings tank and the network starts looking for someone to blame, remember this moment. Remember the night you decided to go toe-to-toe with someone who's been fighting assholes like you since before you were relevant. With that, Jennifer Aniston walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, her head held high and her dignity intact. The studio audience burst into the most genuine applause the show had heard in years, a standing ovation that went on for nearly 2 full minutes. Kimmel sat behind his desk, staring at the spot where she had been standing, looking like a man who had just watched his career go up in flames. The cameras kept rolling for another few seconds, capturing his complete and utter defeat, before finally cutting to commercial. The aftermath would be swift and brutal. By morning, clips of the confrontation would have millions of views across social media. Industry insiders would call it the most devastating takedown in late-night television history. And Jimmy Kimmel would learn, perhaps too late, that some battles are better left unfought, especially when your opponent is someone who survived decades in Hollywood by being tougher than she looks. Jennifer Aniston had entered that studio as a guest. She left as a legend.